come on, chill.
Oh, cool hats.
No, your mother and I are a pair of underwear. Hey! Oh.
Brad, no, well, you gotta have the egg, Brad. You give me this. I've got the 7 grain. And this is the bracelet. Well, that's the sourdough. This is the sourdough. You start with that.
Hello, welcome. Let me ask you something. How many of you here watched The Cosby Show when it originally aired? Leave your comment because I'm sure many of you watched this program in the 80s and 90s, maybe even with your family, on Thursday nights. Today we're going to deeply analyze one of the most disturbing cases in television history, a series that not only dominated the ratings for years, but represented a significant cultural shift in how black families were portrayed in American media. We're talking about a program that saved a network from bankruptcy, that influenced an entire generation of television professionals, and that later collapsed in such a devastating way that its legacy remains deeply divided to this day. Let's start with the context of creation, because it's impossible to understand the magnitude of this story without understanding the television landscape of 1984. Bill Cosby was already at that time an established figure in American entertainment, having made history in the 60s as the first black actor to star in a dramatic series with I Spy, winning 3 consecutive Emmy Awards. His career in stand-up comedy was extremely successful. He had worked in advertising, created educational cartoons, built a public image as a family-friendly and safe entertainer. But Cosby had a specific ambition for television. He wanted to create a program that presented an upper-middle-class black family, professionally successful and educated, functioning in a normal and healthy way, without resorting to the racial stereotypes that still predominated in television programming. NBC was going through a critical period, occupying last place in audience measurements, systematically losing to CBS and ABC, facing significant pressure from advertisers and shareholders. The network's executives were willing to grant practically any demand to bring Cosby back to television, and that's exactly what they did. The contract established gave Cosby a level of creative control that was extremely uncommon. Even by industry standards, he would have final authority over scripts, casting, production decisions, practically all creative aspects of the program. If you follow our channel and appreciate this type of in-depth analysis about classic television behind the scenes, subscribe and activate notifications. Your support is essential for us to continue producing this content. This absolute power created tensions from the beginning of production. Ed Weinberger and Michael Leeson, the main creators and writers, were extremely experienced professionals with a proven track record in successful comedies, but they quickly discovered that working with Cosby meant having their work constantly rejected, rewritten and altered. Cosby interfered in every script, changed dialogues he considered inappropriate, altered jokes that didn't correspond to his comic vision, modified entire plots to adjust them to the messages he wanted to transmit. Production staff report meetings where Cosby simply discarded the work of award-winning writers, arguing that they didn't authentically understand the experience of black families, even when these writers had decades of career and multiple Emmy Awards. Michael Leeson left the program after the first season, officially citing creative differences, but sources close to production confirmed that the situation had become unsustainable. The constant micromanagement, the disregard for the team's professional work, and the impossibility of genuine collaboration made the work environment extremely difficult. Here's a detail that few people know. Several of the most acclaimed episodes of the first season, those considered classics of the series, were written before Cosby completely consolidated his control over all creative aspects. If you watched the program at the time, comment which was your favorite episode. It would be interesting to know if the public's preferences correspond to these different production phases. Felicia Rashad, who played Claire Huxtable, was a classically trained theater actress, extremely talented and professional. She faced a particularly delicate situation behind the scenes, having to constantly navigate between Cosby's directions, which were frequently inappropriate from a dramaturgical point of view, and her own deep understanding of character construction. People who worked on the set report that Rashad developed a sophisticated strategy of superficially agreeing with Cosby's instructions during rehearsals and then subtly executing her own interpretation during tapings. Her technical skill was so superior that he couldn't argue against the results, even when he noticed that she hadn't followed his directions exactly. Malcolm Jamal Warner was only 14 years old when the program began, and Cosby assumed a paternalistic posture toward the young actor that, although it seemed benevolent superficially, created a problematic power dynamic. In later interviews, Warner described the constant pressure to be perfect, not only professionally but in all aspects of his personal life. Cosby monitored his school grades, commented on his friendships, interfered in his personal relationships, creating a situation where the teenager felt he had no private space or personal autonomy. When Warner began a relationship with a fellow cast member, Cosby intervened directly, giving unsolicited advice and making observations about the appropriateness of the relationship. Lisa Bonet's situation deserves special attention because it perfectly illustrates the tensions that existed between Cosby's controlling vision and the realities of the people involved in the production. Bonet played Denise and quickly became the most popular character among young audiences, a style and attitude icon who represented something different and more authentic than the carefully constructed perfection of the rest of the program. But Bonet had her own ideas about art, about representation, about the types of messages she wanted to communicate through her work, and these ideas frequently conflicted with the extremely conservative and controlled vision that Cosby had for The Cosby Show. Tell me in the comments what you think about this situation. How do you evaluate this type of conflict between creative control and artistic freedom? The conflict exploded when Bonet accepted the role in the film Angel Heart by Alan Parker, where she had adult and provocative scenes with Mickey Rourke, completely opposite to the family image associated with the program. Cosby was furious, and although publicly he maintained a supportive posture, behind the scenes he made his discontent absolutely clear. The creation of the spin-off A Different World was presented publicly as an opportunity to expand the program's universe and give Bonet more prominence, but internal sources confirmed that it was essentially a way to distance her from the main program, where Cosby could no longer control her professional and personal choices. When Bonet became pregnant from her relationship with Lenny Kravitz, Cosby effectively removed her from A Different World as well, claiming that a pregnancy didn't fit the narrative of a college character, but in reality, because he deeply disapproved of her life choices. She briefly returned to the main program after the child's birth, but the professional relationship was irreparably destroyed, and her final departure was only a matter of time. Years later, in carefully formulated interviews, Bonet spoke about feeling suffocated and controlled, always choosing her words with extreme care, which suggests there was still fear of the consequences of being completely frank. The level of control that Cosby exercised went far beyond the normal creative decisions of an executive producer or program star. He controlled how the program was marketed, what type of interviews the actors could give, which public appearances were permitted, essentially creating a system where every aspect of the program's public image and its participants went through his approval. There were implicit but rigidly applied rules about maintaining a specific image, never making comments that could be interpreted as negative about the program, always emphasizing family and educational values in any public context. Cosby hired educational consultants, particularly psychiatrist Alvin Poussin, to review scripts and ensure they were transmitting appropriate messages about parenting and education. This was widely praised at the time and generated academic studies about the program's positive educational impact, but it also created a production environment where comic spontaneity was constantly sacrificed in favor of explicit moral lessons. Writers who left the program later spoke about the frustration of trying to write comedy when every joke needed to be analyzed for its educational value, when every plot needed to end with a clear and unequivocal moral message, when anything minimally risky or controversial was immediately rejected. There was a literal list of forbidden topics on the program. Racism couldn't be addressed directly or confrontationally. The Huxtable family couldn't be shown facing explicit discrimination. Broader social problems affecting the Black American community couldn't be discussed in a way that seemed political or critical. Cosby wanted to show a successful black family essentially in a vacuum of racial context, as if the simple demonstration that this was possible was sufficient, without ever examining why it was so rare or what structural obstacles existed. This generated intense debates among the writers, some of whom felt they were doing a disservice by pretending that racism didn't exist in the program's universe, while Cosby argued that simply showing normalcy was revolutionary in itself. If you're finding these revelations interesting and want more analyses like this, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue this work. The Cosby Show was a commercial phenomenon of extraordinary proportions, not just a success, but an economic force that literally saved NBC from financial ruin. For 5 consecutive years, it occupied first place in Nielsen audience measurements, something extremely difficult in any era but particularly impressive, considering the competition of the time. The program generated billions of dollars in advertising revenue and merchandising, licensed products of all types, and transformed Thursday at 8 o'clock into territory absolutely dominated by NBC. But this success created a dangerous dependency. The network was so financially dependent on the program that it gave Cosby practically anything he asked for, eliminating any possibility of anyone within the corporate structure questioning or challenging him. There are reports that NBC actively interfered in its own programming to protect The Cosby Show, moving other programs from their time slots, canceling promising series that might divide the audience, essentially treating that specific time slot as untouchable. This created significant resentment within the network, with creators and producers of other programs feeling they were being sacrificed, but no one could protest publicly because the audience numbers and revenue were undeniable. Salary issues were also problematic. Cosby obviously received a fortune, millions per episode in the final seasons plus profit participation, while Felicia Rashad, despite negotiating a decent salary, received significantly less, raising questions about gender equity, even in a program that supposedly celebrated a strong and independent professional woman. As the program advanced, signs of creative fatigue became increasingly evident. The plots became repetitive, the characters stopped evolving in interesting ways, and the formula that had been fresh and innovative in the first seasons became predictable and worn out. But the audience numbers were still high enough to justify renewals, and Cosby had no interest in ending while there was still significant revenue. So they continued producing episodes that were increasingly formulaic, with occasional moments of quality but predominantly comfortable mediocrity. Anyone who watched the complete program can clearly identify the quality difference between the first and last seasons. And then we arrive at the most difficult and disturbing part of this story. And before continuing, if you appreciate this type of serious historical analysis about classic television, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Your support really makes a difference for us to continue producing this content. The accusations against Bill Cosby began decades before they became widespread public knowledge, but they were systematically suppressed, ignored, discredited by a combination of institutional power, corporate protection, and the extraordinarily strong public image that had been built. Women tried to speak, tried to tell their stories, but faced a public relations and power machine that effectively silenced them. Cosby's image as America's father figure, as a moral educator, as an example of success and decency, was so powerful that creating any cognitive dissonance with that image seemed practically impossible. As time passed, the difficulty of being heard only increased because the myth had grown so much, had become so incorporated into American culture, that questioning it seemed to attack something fundamental. When finally the accusations could no longer be ignored, when dozens of women came forward publicly with consistent and devastating accounts, when the evidence accumulated until it became impossible to deny, the collapse was total and absolute. The Cosby Show was removed from most television networks' programming, streaming platforms canceled licensing agreements, universities withdrew honorary degrees, institutions removed Cosby's name from buildings and educational programs. A program that had been culturally significant, that had opened doors, that had demonstrated important possibilities, became essentially untouchable. And here's an additional tragedy that is often not adequately considered. All the other people involved in the program saw their work tainted by association. Felicia Rashad, Malcolm Jamal Warner, Tempest Bledsoe, Keshia Knight Pulliam, all the actors, writers, directors, Hundreds of technicians and professionals who did genuinely good work and created something culturally significant saw that work transformed into something that no one wants to acknowledge or discuss. The actors had to face impossible questions about what they knew, when they knew it, why they didn't speak up, how they felt, having to navigate between loyalty to colleagues, protection of their own careers, and justice for the victims. Felicia Rashad caused significant controversy when she initially defended Cosby, having to publicly retreat after intense negative reaction. Malcolm Jamal Warner gave extremely careful interviews, trying to separate the artistic work from personal actions, but facing criticism regardless of what he said. There are no easy or comfortable answers to any of these questions, and each person involved had to find their own way to process and respond to an unprecedented situation. Some actors chose to simply never publicly discuss the program again, effectively removing that period from their public narratives. Others tried to contextualize the work within broader perspectives about art and artist, about how societies deal with creations made by people who committed terrible acts. This debate goes far beyond The Cosby Show. It's about how we culturally deal with complicated legacies, about whether we can or should separate art from artist, about memory, justice, and reconciliation. The cultural impact that The Cosby Show had on the representation of black families on television remains significant and continues influencing the industry, even under the weight of everything that was revealed later. The program demonstrated that audiences of all races would watch and connect with stories about middle-class black families, inspired generations of creators and actors, opened institutional doors that had been closed. Contemporary showrunners like Shonda Rhimes and Kenya Barris speak about how the program inspired them to enter the industry, how seeing that representation changed their understanding of what was possible. But all this legacy is now irremediably intertwined with horrible crimes, and there's no way to completely separate one aspect from the other. There are arguments that we should be able to recognize the program's positive cultural impact while totally condemning the actions of its creator and star, that completely censoring the program also erases the work and contributions of everyone else involved. Others believe that the program is so fundamentally linked to Bill Cosby that it cannot be preserved or celebrated in any way, that watching is implicitly minimizing or normalizing his actions. Universities that teach television history face real dilemmas about how to approach the program academically, whether they should exhibit it in educational contexts, how to adequately contextualize it. There is no social consensus on these questions, and there probably never will be. The Cosby Show also illustrates broader questions about power structures in Hollywood and how abuse can thrive when certain people have absolute control and are protected by their financial and cultural contributions. The fact that accusations circulated for decades but were ignored because Cosby was too powerful, because he generated too much revenue, because his public image was too valuable, reveals something deeply problematic about how the industry operates. And it wasn't an isolated case. We've seen similar patterns with Harvey Weinstein and many others, where tacit knowledge or suspicions existed widely, but power and money created almost impenetrable protection. The behind-the-scenes of The Cosby Show also reveals continuing tensions about representation, about who has authority to tell which stories, about the costs of commercial success. Cosby's insistence on controlling all narrative aspects, on presenting a very specific vision of black family that completely avoided discussions about structural racism, generated debates that remain relevant. Some argue that it was revolutionary simply to show a successful black family without racial trauma as the central focus, demonstrating normalcy and possibility. Others believe it was a lost opportunity to address important issues that materially affected the black American community. Both perspectives have substantive merit, and the truth probably lies somewhere between these poles. The Cosby Show remains a case study about how unchecked power, cult of personality, and absolute creative control can create deeply toxic environments even when the final product appears externally perfect. It's a story about how American television functions institutionally, about how cultural myths are built and protected, about how inconvenient truths are systematically buried until they can no longer be suppressed. It's about talent creating something culturally significant while navigating abusive power structures. It's about legacy, memory, justice, and the impossible complexities of completely reconciling all these elements. Tell me in the comments how you, who lived through that era and probably watched the program, deal with this situation today. Can you revisit the program despite everything that was revealed? Do you think we should preserve these works for historical context, or is it preferable to simply remove them from cultural memory? There is no correct answer. It's a genuinely complex discussion, and it would be valuable to hear different perspectives from people who have life experience and memory of that period. Thank you for watching until the end. Leave your comment with your reflections, and see you in the next video.